There is a cruel truth in the world of men. A woman's worth is measured entirely by the flawlessness of her reflection. When Lord Roderick offered his eldest daughter to the Alpha King of the savage North, the southern courts whispered it was an execution disguised as a marriage. She was the family's greatest shame, scarred, crippled, and hidden away in the damp shadows of the keep. They sent her as a sacrifice, an ugly piece offering to a beast they believed would tear her limb from limb. But the lords of the south made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that wolves do not judge a mate by the smoothness of her skin, but by the untamable fire in her soul. The kingdom of Æthelgard was a land of lush valleys, towering stone castles, and a people obsessed with the divine right of beauty. In the estate of Oakhaven, this obsession was law. Lord Roderick was a man who prized aesthetics above all else, his wealth built on the breeding of fine horses and the arrangement of flawless marriages. He had 3 daughters. 2 were the toast of the kingdom, Arabella, with hair like spun sunlight, and Cecily, whose porcelain skin and delicate grace brought lords from across the sea begging for her hand. And then there was Isolde. Isolde was the eldest, but she was the ghost of Oakhaven. At birth, she had been marked. A deep, wine-dark birthmark stretched across the left side of her face, beginning at her temple, creeping over her eyelid, and swirling down her cheek to her jawline. The superstitious servants called it the devil's kiss. If the mark had not been enough to doom her in her father's eyes, a severe riding accident at the age of 9 had shattered her right hip. It had healed poorly, leaving her with a pronounced, permanent limp. While her sisters wore silks and danced at summer galas, Isolde was confined to the upper libraries, wearing high-collared coarse wool, instructed to look away when guests walked the halls. Her father did not just hide her, he despised her. To Lord Roderick, Isolde was a stain on his perfect legacy, but the delicate peace of Æthelgard was shattering. For a century, the Treaty of the Blood Moon had kept the savage lichen tribes of the northern reaches at bay. The werewolves were beasts of legend, monstrous in size, ruthless in battle, and ruled by an Alpha King whose sheer presence was said to make the earth tremble. The treaty demanded a heavy tribute every 50 years, gold, iron, and a noble bride to mingle human diplomacy with the Pack's bloodline. The time had come. King Daria of the Ironjaw Pack had sent his emissaries, towering men wrapped in dire wolf pelts, with eyes like amber glass. They presented the Alpha's terms in the great hall of Oakhaven, demanding a daughter of Lord Roderick's noble house. Isolde remembered the night the decision was made. She had been sitting on the cold stone of the spiral staircase, listening to the furious arguments echoing from her father's study. "You cannot send Arabella," her mother had wept, the sound piercing the heavy oak doors. "She is to marry the Duke of Westfall. She is too fragile, too beautiful to be thrown to a mongrel dog." "And Cecily is betrothed to the prince," Roderick snapped back. "If I refuse the Alpha King, the northern hordes will sweep through Oakhaven and burn it to the ash. Daria is a monster. He has killed his way to the top of the Packs. He cares not for human politics, only for the tribute." A heavy silence fell over the room. Isolde held her breath on the staircase, her bad leg throbbing in the damp night air. "There is another daughter," her father said, his voice dropping to a cold, calculating whisper. "Isolde," her mother gasped. "But Roderick, she is hideous. The Alpha King might see it as an insult. He might slaughter her the moment he lifts her veil." "Let him," Roderick replied, his words acting as a physical blow to the eavesdropping girl. "If the beast tears her throat out, the blood debt is still paid. A daughter of Oakhaven was delivered. What he does with her is his concern. We rid ourselves of our shame, and Oakhaven is saved." 2 days later, Isolde was packed into a windowless, iron-reinforced carriage. There were no grand farewells, no tearful hugs from her sisters. Arabella and Cecily stood on the grand balcony, wrapping their velvet cloaks tight, looking down at her with a mixture of relief and pity. Lord Roderick handed the royal marriage writ to the northern emissary, refusing to even look his eldest daughter in the eye. "Do not speak unless spoken to, Isolde," was her father's parting command, "and keep your veil down. Do not shame me in your final moments." The journey north took 3 agonizing weeks. The lush green valleys of Ethelgard slowly gave way to jagged black mountains and forests of ancient, frost-covered pines. The temperature plummeted, biting through Isolde's inadequate clothing. Inside the freezing carriage, she huddled into a small ball, nursing her aching hip. She had no illusions about her fate. The tales of King Daria were terrifying. He was a warlord who had united the feral packs through sheer, bloody dominance. He was a beast who shifted into a wolf the size of a war horse. Isolde stared at her hands, rough from years of secretly working in the castle gardens. She was 22, entirely unloved, and riding toward her execution. Yet beneath the terror, a strange, quiet numbness settled over her. If death was waiting for her in the ice, at least she would no longer have to hide in the shadows of Oakhaven. Wintergard was not a castle. It was a fortress carved directly into the heart of a frozen mountain. As the heavy iron gates groaned open, Isolde's carriage rattled into a massive courtyard lit by roaring braziers. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and something entirely wild, the heavy, earthy scent of predators. The carriage door was wrenched open by a Lycan guard. He did not offer his hand, merely gestured for her to step out. Isolde gathered her heavy skirts, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. She stepped down, but her bad hip, stiffened by weeks of freezing travel, gave way. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the hard, packed snow. A ripple of low, guttural laughter echoed from the onlookers. Men and women dressed in leathers and furs, their eyes glinting with a feral, predatory light. Isolde felt her face burn beneath her heavy silk veil. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain radiating down her leg, and stood as straight as her crooked frame would allow. "Bring the human to the great hall," a booming voice commanded. She was led through cavernous corridors of black basalt. The architecture was brutal, devoid of the delicate tapestries and gilded statues of her homeland. Here, the walls were adorned with weapons and the skulls of massive beasts. The great hall was immense, centered around a fire pit the size of a cottage. At the far end, slouched upon a throne of dark iron and massive antlers, sat King Daria. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. Daria was terrifyingly magnificent. He was a mountain of a man, clad in dark leather and the pelt of a massive white bear. His hair was a shaggy mane of dark obsidian, and his face was rugged, scarred with 3 jagged lines running down his jaw, a testament to brutal challenges won. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. They were a vivid, piercing amber, glowing with an inner, primal fire. The human emissary who had accompanied her from Oakhaven stepped forward, bowing low. "Great King Daria, Oakhaven fulfills its ancient oath. I present to you the noble daughter of Lord Roderick, your new bride and queen." Daria did not speak immediately. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his amber eyes locked onto the small, heavily veiled figure standing awkwardly before him. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding. Wolves, Isolde knew, relied on scent more than sight. She wondered what she smelled like. Fear, cold, and rejection. "She trembles," Daria rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. It was a deep baritone that vibrated in the soles of Isolde's boots. "And she hides. Why does a bride of the mighty Oakhaven come to my hall, shrouded like a widow?" The human emissary swallowed hard. My king, it is a southern custom of modesty. I have no patience for southern customs, Daria said, standing up. He was taller than any man she had ever seen. He walked down the stone steps of his dais, moving with a silent, terrifying grace that belonged only to apex predators. The entire hall fell dead silent. Every wolf in the room watched their alpha. He stopped inches from her. The heat radiating from his massive body was overwhelming. "Lift the veil," he commanded softly. Isolde's hands shook. She thought of her father's words. "Do not shame me." She knew what would happen. The king would see her face. He would see the deep, swirling red stains that marked her as a monster. He would see the insult her father had dealt him. I cannot, my lord," she whispered, her voice cracking. Daria's eyes narrowed. "In Winterguard, my word is absolute law. Lift it, little bird, or I will tear it from you." Closing her eyes and preparing for the inevitable roar of outrage, Isolde reached up with trembling fingers and pulled the heavy black silk over her head. She kept her gaze fixed firmly on the stone floor, her scarred cheek exposed to the harsh, flickering firelight. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed through the hall. Whispers broke out among the lichens. The human emissary took a terrified step back, preparing to flee before the Alpha's wrath erupted. Daria stood perfectly still. The silence stretched, tight as a drawn bowstring. Isolde waited for the blow. She waited for the disgust. Instead, a massive, calloused hand gently touched her chin. Isolde gasped, her eyes flying open. Daria was not looking at her with revulsion. His amber eyes were wide, tracing the contours of the wine-dark mark on her face. His thumb, rough and warm, lightly brushed against the deepest crimson part of the scar near her temple. "Who did this?" he growled, the vibration in his chest vibrating into her skin. No one," Isolde stammered, entirely thrown off balance by his gentle touch. "I was born with it. They call it a curse." "A curse," Daria repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at her awkward stance, noting the way she kept her weight off her right leg. "And your leg? Were you born with that too?" "A horse crushed it when I was 9, my king." Daria turned his head slowly, locking his terrifying gaze onto the human emissary. "Lord Roderick sent me his broken daughter," Daria said, his voice dropping to a deadly, lethal whisper. He thought to insult the Ironjaw pack. He thought to throw away his trash into the snow. The emissary dropped to his knees, sobbing. "Mercy, King Daria! I am but a messenger. Lord Roderick forced this." Isolde closed her eyes, tears finally spilling over her lashes. It was over. The truth was out. Suddenly, Daria's hand slid from her chin to the back of her neck, his large fingers tangling in her hair, holding her securely but not painfully. He turned back to the hall, his voice suddenly echoing like thunder. "The Southern Lords are fools!" Daria roared, the sound making the very stones vibrate. They look at the sky and see only clouds, blind to the storm. In the lands of the lichen, marks of blood upon the face are kissed by the war gods. They are the marks of survivors, of fighters. He looked down at Isolde, the fierce anger in his eyes replaced by something deep, possessive, and intensely warm. "Your father threw away a diamond because he lacked the light to see it shine. You are no curse, Isolde of Oakhaven. You are my queen, and anyone who looks upon you with disrespect will lose their eyes." Life in Winterguard was a brutal, jarring contrast to the stifling etiquette of Oakhaven. Here, there were no whispers behind velvet fans. Conflicts were settled with bared teeth and blood on the training grounds. The pack was a living, breathing entity, bound by strength, loyalty, and a hierarchy that demanded absolute respect. Isolde expected to be locked away in a high tower, exactly as she had been at home. Instead, King Daria thrust her into the very heart of the pack. He gave her chambers that adjoined his own, draped in the finest, softest furs. He ordered the castle healers to examine her hip, providing her with a beautifully carved walking cane of ironwood that helped ease her limp. For the first time in her life, she was allowed to eat at the high table, seated directly beside the Alpha King. But a king's protection does not automatically earn a pack's respect. To the werewolves of the Iron Jaw, Isolde was a fragility. She was human, she was lame, and she possessed no wolf blood. The greatest hostility came from Lady Katerina. Katerina was a pure-blood lichen, a fierce warrior of the pack, and a woman of startling, lethal beauty. She had long, silver-white hair and the icy blue eyes of a winter storm. For years, the pack had assumed Katerina would become Daria's mate. The arrival of the crippled human had enraged her, a slight to her pride that she couldn't let go. The tension finally snapped during the Festival of the First Frost, a massive, raucous banquet held in the great hall. Ale flowed freely, and the wolves tore into roasted meats with their bare hands, laughing and shouting across the fires. Isolde sat beside Daria, wearing a dress of deep emerald wool that he had specifically commissioned for her, the high collar finally lowered, her birthmark fully visible. Daria was attentive, constantly filling her cup and carving the best cuts of meat for her plate, his massive arm casually draped over the back of her chair. Katerina, seated a few down the table, watched them with a sneer that twisted her beautiful features. She had had enough. Standing up, Katerina slammed her heavy tankard onto the wood. The loud crack silenced the immediate area, and the quiet rippled outward until the hall was completely still. "My king," Katerina called out, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "It is a tradition at the first frost that the queen of the pack leads the opening dance, a display of grace and vitality to ensure a strong winter for the pack." Isolde's blood ran cold. She gripped her ironwood cane, resting against the table. Dancing was impossible for her. Katerina knew this. It was a calculated, deliberate attempt to humiliate her in front of the entire assembly, to prove how weak and unsuitable she was to be their queen. Daria's body instantly went rigid. A low, terrifying growl began to rumble in his chest, vibrating against Isolde's arm. His amber eyes flashed gold, the wolf beneath his skin violently clawing toward the surface. "You dare challenge her in my hall, Katerina?" Daria snarled, half rising from his throne. "I should rip out your tongue for the disrespect." "I merely ask for our traditions to be honored, Alpha," Katerina said smoothly, looking directly at Isolde's scarred face with unapologetic disgust. "Or are we to bend our ancient ways for a broken human who cannot even walk, let alone run with the pack?" Daria slammed his fists on the table, the wood splintering under his strength. He opened his mouth to order Katerina thrown into the dungeons, but before he could speak, a small, warm hand settled over his massive, clenched fist. Daria looked down, startled. Isolde was trembling, but her jaw was set. For 22 years, she had let her father and sisters speak for her. She had let them hide her. She had absorbed their mockery and their shame until she believed she was nothing but a shadow. But as she looked at Katerina, she didn't see the beautiful, terrifying lichen warrior. She saw her sister Arabella. She saw the same cruel, shallow vanity that had imprisoned her entire life. Isolde stood up. It took effort, and she leaned heavily on her cane, but she stood tall, throwing her shoulders back. "I cannot dance, Lady Katerina," Isolde's voice rang out. It was not the booming roar of an alpha, but it carried a quiet, steel-like clarity that pierced the silence of the hall. "My leg is broken, and it will never be whole. My face is scarred, and it will never be smooth." Katerina scoffed loudly. "Then what use are you to our king? What strength do you bring to the Iron Jaw?" "The strength of survival," Isolde replied, stepping out from behind the heavy oak table. She limped down the dais, entirely unarmed, walking directly toward the fierce Lycan warrior. Daria watched her, utterly captivated, his protective instincts warring with an intense, burning pride. Isolde stopped a few feet from Katerina. "You prize yourselves on your scars won in battle, do you not? You wear them proudly. I was born into a world that hated me simply for existing. I was starved, locked away, and treated as a monster by my own blood. I have endured a lifetime of cruelty that would have shattered the minds of lesser women. I do not need claws or fangs to prove my strength. My spine is made of iron, Lady Katerina. You may mock my limp, but you will find I do not break." The hall was dead silent. A human, a crippled woman, was standing toe-to-toe with one of the most lethal wolves in the pack, radiating absolute defiance. Katerina's eyes narrowed, her lips curling back to reveal slightly elongated canines. For a moment, it looked as though she might strike Isolde down. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over them both. Daria had moved with terrifying speed, stepping right behind Isolde. He didn't look at Katerina. He looked down at the top of Isolde's head, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with an emotion so fierce it looked like madness. "She is the queen," Daria announced to the hall, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Her scars are my scars. Her enemies are my enemies. And her strength—" He paused, gently wrapping his massive arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest so she didn't have to rely entirely on her cane. "Is greater than any I have ever witnessed." He finally looked at Katerina, his eyes flashing a deadly, unmistakable warning. "The queen does not dance tonight. The queen rules." For a long, tense moment, Katerina stared at them. Then, slowly, the Lycan warrior lowered her eyes, baring her neck in a traditional gesture of submission. She stepped back, melting into the crowd. As Daria led Isolde back to the high table, a low, rhythmic thumping began to echo through the hall. One by one, the werewolves were pounding their fists against their chests, the iron jaw salute of profound respect. Isolde sat down, her heart racing, tears pricking her eyes. She looked at Daria. The Alpha King was looking back at her, not with pity, and not with duty. He was looking at her with absolute, unyielding devotion. For the first time in her life, the ugly, discarded daughter of Oakhaven realized she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks that followed the festival of the first frost transformed Winterguard from a prison into a sanctuary for Isolde. For the first time in her life, she was not a secret to be kept in the dark. She was the queen of the Ironjaw pack, and Daria made sure the entire mountain knew it. Their bond grew in the quiet moments, away from the howling winds and the feral energy of the pack. Daria was a creature of profound violence on the battlefield, but with Isolde, his gentleness was absolute. He would spend hours in their chambers, his massive frame curled near the hearth, listening to her read from the ancient Lycan histories she had discovered in the keep's neglected libraries. At Oakhaven, her father had forbidden her from studying anything beyond needlework and scripture. Here, Daria devoured her intellect. He asked her opinions on trade routes, winter rationing, and pack disputes. He valued her mind, something no man in the South had ever bothered to acknowledge. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Daria sat on the edge of their massive, fur-lined bed. He reached out, his large, calloused fingers tracing the wine-dark birthmark that swept across her face. Isolde instinctively flinched, a ghost of her past trauma. But Daria didn't pull away. "In the old tongue," Daria murmured, his amber eyes locked onto hers. "We call a mark like this ignis anima. The soul's fire. It means the gods touched you before you were born, marking you as a warrior, for battles yet to come. My father called it a curse, Isolde whispered, looking down at her hands. He said it was a punishment for some sin of my ancestors. Daria's jaw tightened, the 3 jagged scars on his cheek standing out starkly against his skin. Your father is a coward who fears what he cannot control. You are no curse, Isolde. You are the beating heart of this mountain. But the peace of the northern reaches was an illusion, fragile as the morning frost. The twist of fate arrived not with a roar, but with a whisper. A Lycan border patrol intercepted a southern courier attempting to cross the jagged pass of the Blackwood estate, a territory owned by Lord Harrington, a notoriously ruthless southern baron. The courier was dragged into the great hall, half frozen and terrified, clutching a leather dispatch tube sealed with the crimson wax of Oakhaven. Daria cracked the seal, his eyes scanning the parchment. As he read, a low, terrifying growl began to vibrate in his chest. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. He handed the letter to Isolde without a word. Isolde's eyes darted across the elegant, sweeping calligraphy of her father, Lord Roderick. It was addressed to Duke Archibald Montgomery, the supreme commander of the southern armies. The beast took the bait without suspicion. The crippled girl has bought us the time we required. The silver mines of Westfall have yielded enough ore, and the smiths have worked day and night. The northern hordes believe themselves placated by the tribute. Move your battalions through the Blackwood Pass before the heavy snows block the valley. We will catch the mongrels sleeping. Burn Winterguard to the ground and leave no wolf alive. Not even my daughter, should she still draw breath. The parchment slipped from Isolde's trembling fingers, fluttering to the stone floor. The breath was knocked from her lungs. Her father had never intended to honor the Treaty of the Blood Moon. She wasn't just a discarded daughter, she was a sacrificial lamb, a Trojan horse meant to lull the Alpha King into a false sense of security, while the South forged weapons of pure silver, the only metal lethal to Lycans. Roderick had known Daria would accept the tribute and drop his guard. He had planned to murder them all, including his own flesh and blood, to secure his legacy and wipe out the Lycan threat forever. Chaos erupted in the Great Hall. The pack commanders roared for blood, their eyes flashing gold and crimson. Lady Katerina slammed her fists onto the table, demanding they march south immediately and slaughter the human settlements. Isolde stood frozen, the reality of her father's ultimate betrayal washing over her. He truly hated her enough to let her burn. She looked at Daria. The Alpha King was staring at her, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting, agonizing second, Isolde feared he would blame her. She was human. She was Roderick's daughter. She was the weapon they had used against him. Daria, Isolde choked out, stepping toward him, her ironwood cane clattering against the stone. I did not know. I swear to you, I knew nothing of this. Daria closed the distance between them in a single stride. He ignored the roaring commanders and the bloodlust filling the room. He took her face in both of his massive hands, his thumbs resting on her cheeks. I know, Daria said, his voice a deep, grounding rumble amidst the panic. You are my mate. You are Ironjaw now. Their treachery is not your burden. He turned to face his commanders, his roar silencing the room instantly. Prepare the defenses. The South brings war to our doorstep. They think to catch us sleeping. We will show them the nightmare of the waking wolf. The Southern Army arrived 3 days later, a glittering sea of steel and crimson banners marching through the snow-choked valleys. Lord Roderick and Duke Archibald Montgomery led the vanguard, confident in their surprise attack. They brought with them siege engines and archers armed with silver-tipped arrows, an arsenal designed specifically for genocide. Inside Winterguard, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Daria had ordered Isolde to the deepest, safest catacombs of the fortress, guarded by his most trusted warriors. But Isolde refused. "I am not a southern princess, to be locked away while my people bleed," she had argued fiercely, gripping Daria's arm as he strapped on his heavy iron armor. "I know my father's tactics. I know Duke Montgomery's formations. I spent my life trapped in the library of Oakhaven reading their war journals because they wouldn't let me attend the banquets. Let me help." Daria had looked at her, his chest aching with a mixture of terror for her safety and an overwhelming, consuming pride. He kissed her fiercely, branding her lips with his. "Stay on the battlements. Do not step onto the field. That is an order from your alpha, and a plea from your husband." The battle commenced with a deafening barrage. Flaming pitch and silver-tipped bolts rained down upon the black basalt walls of Winterguard. The Lycans charged, shifting into massive, terrifying wolves that tore through the human infantry like scythes through wheat. The snow quickly turned a violent, visceral red. But the silver was taking its toll. Every scrape, every minor cut from a silver weapon burned the Lycans like holy fire, slowing their healing and draining their immense strength. From the high battlements, Isolde watched the carnage through a spyglass. She saw the glittering gold armor of Duke Montgomery, directing the archers to flank the eastern ridge, a classic southern pincer movement her father favored. "They are moving to the eastern ridge to trap the vanguard," Isolde shouted to the Lycan commander beside her. "Signal the eastern pack. Tell them to fall back into the tree line and attack from the high ground. Roderick's spearmen cannot pivot in heavy snow." The commander howled the orders, the sound carrying over the din of battle. The Lycans shifted their tactics perfectly, ambushing the flanking archers and breaking the southern lines. Down on the field, Daria was a god of war. In his wolf form, a monstrous beast of midnight fur and glowing amber eyes, he crushed horses and snapped iron shields with his jaws. He carved a path directly toward the center of the southern command, his eyes fixed on the banners of Oakhaven. He intended to sever the head of the snake, but Lord Roderick was a coward who hid behind mercenaries. As Daria leaped toward the command tent, a hidden ballista fired. A spear, thick as a man's arm and tipped in pure, unalloyed silver, struck Daria in the shoulder. The Alpha King crashed to the frozen ground, a roar of pure, agonizing pain echoing across the valley. The silver burned into his bloodstream, forcibly shifting him back into his human form. He struggled to rise, clutching his smoking shoulder, but Duke Montgomery's elite guards quickly surrounded him, their silver swords drawn. From the battlements, Isolde's heart stopped. "Daria!" she screamed. Without thinking, without hesitating, she turned and fled down the winding stone stairs. Her bad hip screamed in protest, but adrenaline masked the agony. She pushed past the rear guards, bursting through the heavy iron gates of the fortress and out into the freezing, chaotic nightmare of the battlefield. "Isolde, no!" Lady Katerina shouted, busy tearing through a line of southern swordsmen. But Isolde was already moving. She limped fiercely across the blood-soaked snow, her ironwood cane gripping the ice. She reached the center of the conflict just as Lord Roderick dismounted his horse, drawing an ornate, silver-inlaid longsword, preparing to execute the fallen Alpha King. "Stop!" Isolde's voice cracked like a whip across the frozen air. Roderick froze, turning his head. His eyes widened in absolute shock as he looked at the woman standing before him. She was not huddled in fear. She was not veiled. She stood tall, the wind whipping her dark hair around her scarred face, her chin held high in absolute defiance. "Isolde," Roderick breathed, utterly bewildered. You are alive. Step aside, girl. You have done your duty. The beast is finished." "He is not a beast!" Isolde screamed, stepping directly between her father's blade and Daria's bleeding form. She planted her cane firmly into the snow, creating a physical barrier. "He is my king. He is my husband. And he has shown me more humanity in a few months than you have in a lifetime, you treacherous coward." Roderick's face twisted in disgust. You have been corrupted by these animals. Look at you. You are a shame to the house of Oakhaven. Move, or I will cut you down with the mongrel." Behind her, Daria groaned, his massive hand weakly grasping the hem of her cloak. "Isolde, run," he rasped, his veins glowing faintly black where the silver poisoned him. "I am done running," Isolde said coldly, staring dead into her father's eyes. "You threw me to the wolves, father. Did you never stop to think that I might learn to lead the pack?" Duke Montgomery sneered, stepping forward. "Enough of this family drama. Kill them both, Roderick." But Roderick's hesitation had cost him. The momentary pause allowed the Ironjaw pack to realize their alpha was down. A collective, earth-shattering howl rose from the tree line. Led by Lady Katarina, who fought with the fury of a demon, the Lycans crashed into the elite guard like an avalanche of fur and fangs. The Oakhaven guards were decimated in seconds. Duke Montgomery was torn from his horse by Katarina herself. Roderick stumbled backward, terrified, dropping his silver sword in the snow as the massive, blood-soaked wolves encircled him, growling low, their teeth bared. Isolde did not look at her father as he fell to his knees, begging for mercy. She dropped her cane and fell to the snow beside Daria, her hands desperately pressing against the horrific, smoking wound in his shoulder. She didn't care about the battle raging around them. She only cared about the amber eyes looking up at her, filled with an impossible, reverent love. The snow around Daria was melting, turned to dark slush by the immense heat radiating from his feverish body. The silver bolt had pierced deep beneath his collarbone, the toxic metal seeping into his veins, turning the surrounding flesh a necrotic, charred black. Isolde's hands were slick with his blood as she pressed desperately against the wound. "Maester Corvin!" Isolde screamed over the dying din of the battlefield, searching for the pack's chief healer. An older Lycan with a scarred face and a heavy leather satchel dropped to his knees beside her. He took one look at the smoking wound and the blackened veins creeping up Daria's neck, and his shoulders slumped. "My queen," Corvin rasped, his voice thick with grief. "It is pure star silver. It has entered the blood. No Lycan can survive this. The Alpha is... he is returning to the earth." "No," Isolde said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "He is not." She looked at her father, Lord Roderick, who was now kneeling in the snow, surrounded by growling wolves, his face pale with terror. Isolde knew her father. He was a meticulous, paranoid man. He would never deploy a weapon without keeping the antidote close at hand, just in case the silver accidentally poisoned one of his own elite handlers. Isolde released Daria to Corvin, snatched her ironwood cane from the snow, and marched directly toward her father. Lady Katarina stepped aside, allowing the queen to pass. "Where is it?" Isolde demanded, the tip of her cane pressing against Roderick's chest. "Isolde, please!" Roderick babbled, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Call off these beasts. I am your father. I gave you life." "You gave me a prison," she snarled, striking him across the face with the heavy silver rings on her left hand. Roderick fell sideways, spitting blood into the snow. "You commanded Duke Montgomery to use the sterling alchemical silver. I read Lord Sterling's journals in your library, father. I know that star silver requires a binding agent of nightshade to keep it from shattering on impact. And I know nightshade poisoning has a cure. Give me the vial, or I swear by the old gods, I will let Katarina eat you alive, piece by piece." Roderick trembled, his eyes darting to the massive, blood-soaked form of Katarina, who licked her chops in eager anticipation. With a shaking hand, Roderick reached into his velvet doublet and pulled out a small, lead-lined flask. Isolde snatched it from his grip. She turned back to Daria, dropping to the ice. "Corvin, hold him down. When the antidote hits his blood, the silver will try to fight its way out. It will be agony." Corvin and two other massive Lycan warriors pinned Daria's arms and legs. Isolde uncorked the flask. It smelled of sulphur and crushed bone. Without hesitating, she poured the thick, viscous liquid directly into the smoking wound. Daria's eyes snapped open. They were not the warm amber she loved. They were glowing with a terrifying, blinding gold. A roar ripped from his throat, a sound so filled with primal agony that several southern soldiers dropped their weapons and covered their ears. His body thrashed with earth-shattering force, throwing off one of the warriors. But Isolde did not flinch. She leaned her entire body weight over his chest, pressing her hands over the wound, whispering ancient lichen prayers she had memorized from the archives. "Stay with me, Daria," she sobbed, her tears falling onto his scarred cheek. "You do not get to leave me. I forbid it. I am your queen, and I command you to stay." For 10 agonizing minutes, the battlefield was entirely still, save for the horrifying gasps of the fallen Alpha King. The black veins on his neck pulsed violently, then, slowly, began to recede. The smoking flesh cooled. The silver bolt, pushed out by his rapidly regenerating lichen tissue, slid backward with a sickening squelch until Corvin grabbed it with a heavy leather glove and tossed it into the snow. Daria's chest heaved. The blinding gold in his eyes faded back to a soft, exhausted amber. He looked up at Isolde, his massive, blood-stained hand reaching up to touch the birthmark on her cheek. "You are crying, my little bird," he rasped, a weak smile touching his lips. "You foolish, beautiful beast," Isolde wept, burying her face into his neck, inhaling the scent of pine, smoke, and life. A deafening, triumphant howl rose from Lady Katerina, echoing off the mountain peaks. One by one, the entire Ironjaw pack joined in, a symphony of victory and absolute reverence. They were not howling for their alpha. They were howling for the crippled human girl from the south, the woman who had stared down an army, outsmarted a duke, and dragged their king back from the edge of death. The great hall of Winterguard had never felt so vast, nor so terrifyingly cold. 4 weeks had bled away since the snows of the Black Pass were stained crimson with the blood of the southern vanguard. The brutal winter of the northern reaches had swept in, burying the dead beneath a heavy, silent shroud of white frost. Yet, inside the mountain fortress, the fires roared with an insatiable hunger, casting long, flickering shadows across the black basalt walls. Daria sat upon his massive throne of dark iron and intertwined stag antlers. He was changed. The terrifying, unchecked feral energy that had once radiated from him was now tempered by something far more dangerous, a chilling, absolute control. Beneath his heavy tunic of black wolf pelt, a jagged star-shaped scar rested directly over his heart, a permanent, raised brand of necrotic tissue where the silver bolt had nearly claimed his immortal life. He was a king who had looked into the abyss and roared until it blinked first. But the true shift in power did not belong to the Alpha. It belonged to the woman seated beside him. Queen Isolde sat upon a throne, newly carved from the ancient, pale ironwood of the deep forest, sitting equal in height to her husband's. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that spilled over the dais like liquid shadow. A delicate, brutal crown of braided silver and iron rested upon her dark hair. She no longer hid behind heavy collars or veils. Her hair was swept back, proudly displaying the swirling, wine-dark birthmark that covered the left side of her face. She held her polished walking cane across her lap, not as a crutch, but as a scepter of sovereign command. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall groaned open, the sound echoing like a death knell. A human envoy stepped forward, flanked by a dozen towering lichen guards whose eyes glowed with barely suppressed violence. The envoy was Lord Arthur Penhaligon, a seasoned diplomat from the southern capital, wearing the golden crest of King Reginald. He looked pale, his eyes darting nervously to the massive wolves that lined the hall, but it was the prisoners dragged in behind him that drew the collective, predatory silence of the pack. Lord Roderick of Oakhaven was thrown to the hard stone floor. His velvet doublet was torn and caked with frozen mud. The arrogant, meticulous lord who had spent his life orchestrating the perfection of his bloodline now looked like a starving beggar. Beside him, weeping uncontrollably and shivering in their dirt-stained travelling cloaks, were Isolde's sisters, Arabella and Cecily. They had been intercepted by Lycan scouts near the coastal borders, desperately trying to board a smuggler's ship to the free cities. Alpha King Daria, Queen Isolde, Lord Arthur Penhaligon announced, his voice trembling slightly as he dropped to one knee. He did not dare look Daria in the eye. I bring you the treacherous curs of House Oakhaven. King Reginald of Ethelgard disavows their actions entirely. Lord Roderick acted without the Crown's mandate. He sought to break the Treaty of the Blood Moon, to steal the Northern Iron Reserves for his own selfish ambition. Penhaligon swallowed hard, gesturing to the pathetic figures on the floor. The Crown begs for the continuation of our peace, and offers the lives of these traitors as restitution for the blood spilled. Daria leaned forward, the movement slow and deliberate. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The penalty for bringing Star Silver into my territory is death, Daria rumbled, his deep baritone vibrating in the marrow of everyone present. He did not just betray a treaty, he betrayed his own blood. Daria turned his massive head, his amber eyes softening only a fraction as he looked at his mate. The judgment of Oakhaven does not belong to the Alpha. It belongs to the Queen. The entire pack shifted their gaze to Isolde. Isolde remained perfectly still. She looked down at the family that had spent 22 years wishing she did not exist. Arabella was the first to break. She scrambled forward on her knees, her blonde hair matted, her face smeared with dirt and tears. "Isolde! Sister, please!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "We knew nothing of the silver. We swear it. Father told us you were dead. Have mercy on us. Look at me. I am your blood. I cannot survive in a dungeon." "Do not lie to her." Lady Katerina stepped out from the shadows of the pillars, her icy blue eyes fixed on Arabella with sheer disgust. Katerina tossed a bundle of crumpled, wax-sealed letters onto the stone floor. "Our scouts intercepted your courier, little human. We read the missives. You and Cecily were writing to the southern lords, bragging about how the ugly cripple had finally served a purpose by buying you time to forge your silver arrows." Cecily let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. Isolde's expression didn't change. She slowly stood up. She did not lean on her cane. Her bad hip ached with the deep chill of the mountain, but she refused to show a fraction of weakness. She walked down the stone steps of the dais, the heavy silence of the great hall pressing in around her. "You lied, Arabella," Isolde said, her voice quiet, but carrying a terrifying, crystalline clarity. "But that is not the worst of your sins, is it?" Roderick's head snapped up, his eyes widening in sudden, panicked realization. "Isolde, silence! Do not speak of it." Isolde ignored him, stopping just a few feet from her father. She looked at Lord Arthur Penhaligon. "Lord Penhaligon, where is my mother? Where is Lady Genevieve?" Penhaligon looked down at the floor, deeply uncomfortable. "My queen, Lady Genevieve is dead. She was executed for high treason by King Reginald's guard 3 days ago." A collective gasp echoed from the few human servants in the hall. Isolde's jaw tightened, but she nodded slowly, as if she had expected it. "Explain to the court how she died, Lord Arthur," Isolde commanded. "When the King's Guard arrived at Oakhaven to arrest your family for the unprovoked attack on the north," Penhaligon stammered, "Lord Roderick had already fled. He left Lady Genevieve locked in the estate's solar. He left forged documents claiming she was the mastermind behind the silver trade. He sacrificed his own wife to delay the king's justice so he could escape with his favoured daughters. Cecily looked up, her face twisted in horror. "Father, you told us Mother stayed behind to pack the remaining gold." "You fool!" Roderick spat at his youngest daughter. "I did what I had to do to preserve the legacy of our house. She was weak. She wept for this crippled abomination every night." He turned his furious, bloodshot eyes to Isolde. "Yes, I left her, just as I left you, because in this world only the flawless and the ruthless survive. You think you are a queen. You are nothing but a monster, playing dress-up with dogs." A deafening roar ripped from Daria's throat. He launched himself from the throne, crossing the distance in a blur of terrifying speed. He grabbed Roderick by the throat with one massive hand, lifting the choking lord entirely off the floor. Daria's eyes burned with blinding gold, his fangs elongating as the wolf beneath his skin clawed violently for release. "Daria, stop!" Isolde's voice was not a shout, but it held the absolute, unshakable weight of an iron anvil. Daria froze. His chest heaved, his claws digging into Roderick's neck, drawing beads of bright red blood. He looked at Isolde, his golden eyes battling the feral urge to rip the man's head from his shoulders. "He is not yours to break," Isolde said softly, stepping closer and placing her small, scarred hand over Daria's massive, trembling arm. "Drop him." With a disgusted snarl, Daria threw Roderick to the stone floor. The broken lord gasped for air, clutching his bleeding throat. Daria did not step back. He positioned his massive frame directly behind Isolde, a looming shadow of lethal protection. Isolde looked down at her father, her eyes devoid of hatred, devoid of anger. There was only cold, absolute finality. "History, father, is written by the survivors," Isolde declared, her voice ringing out to the farthest corners of the cavernous hall. "You spent your life obsessed with surfaces. You bred horses for their coats and daughters for their faces. You believed that beauty was power and that a scar was a sin. You threw away your eldest daughter, and you murdered your own wife to save your cowardly skin. You look at me, and you still see only a broken thing." She lifted her ironwood cane and pointed it directly at his chest. "I will not grant you the mercy of a quick death," Isolde pronounced. The words sealed his fate in the heavy air. "Death is too brief a lesson for vanity. Lord Arthur Penhaligon, tell King Reginald that the Ironjaw Pack accepts his peace. But House Oakhaven is erased from the earth. I strip Lord Roderick of his name, his lands, and his wealth. He will be sent to the deep sulphur mines of the Obsidian Coast. He will dig the earth in total darkness with his bare hands, coughing on ash until his lungs collapse, just as he intended for my people." Roderick's face drained of all colour. "No, Isolde, you cannot do this. I am a lord of the realm. I demand a swift execution." "You are nothing," Isolde corrected, her voice freezing the blood in his veins. She turned her gaze to Arabella and Cecily, who were now clinging to each other, paralyzed with terror. "As for you two," Isolde continued, her tone dropping to a sharp, clinical whisper, "you prize yourselves on your flawless skin and the high-born marriages your beauty can buy. You stood by while our mother was left to the executioner's block. Lady Katerina." The fierce lichen warrior stepped forward, bowing her head respectfully to her queen. "Yes, my queen." "You will escort my sisters to the remote, wind-battered rocks of the Iron Islands," Isolde commanded. "You will hand them over to the salt farmers. They will be married off to the lowest, most impoverished labourers of the coast. Let us see how long their perfect porcelain skin lasts when they must scrub their own floors, gut their own fish, and freeze in the sea storms without a mirror to tell them their worth." Arabella screamed, a horrific, soul-tearing sound. She clawed at the stone floor as two massive lichen guards hauled her to her feet by her armpits. "Isolde, you witch! You ugly, scarred witch! I curse you!" Cecily merely sobbed, her spirit completely broken as the guards dragged them backward. Isolde did not flinch. She watched impassively as her father and sisters were dragged from the great hall, their cries echoing down the long basalt corridors until they finally faded into the howling mountain winds outside. The heavy oak doors slammed shut with a deafening boom. The ghosts of her past, the agonizing chains of her childhood, were finally, irrevocably severed. A heavy, warm silence settled over the great hall. The pack watched her, their eyes filled with a terrifying, absolute reverence. She had not shed a drop of blood, yet she had utterly destroyed her enemies. She felt Daria step closer, wrapping his massive arms around her waist from behind. He rested his chin gently on the top of her head, the heat of his body seeping through her velvet gown, grounding her. "A ruthless judgment, my queen," Daria murmured, his deep voice thick with an overwhelming, consuming pride. "A just one," Isolde corrected, leaning back against his solid chest. Her trembling finally stopped. She reached up, her fingers threading through his dark, shaggy hair. "They will live, but they will learn what it means to survive when the world looks at them and sees nothing of value." Daria turned her around slowly. He ignored the hundreds of watching eyes. His amber gaze dropped to the wine-dark mark on her cheek. He reached up, his rough thumb tracing the edge of the scar with a tenderness that defied his monstrous strength. He leaned down, pressing a soft, reverent kiss directly against the deepest part of the crimson mark. "You are the most beautiful, terrifying creature in this world, Isolde of the Iron Jaw," he whispered fiercely, his forehead resting against hers. "And I will spend the rest of my immortal life proving it to you." Isolde smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up her face and banished the dark shadows of Oakhaven forever. She was Isolde the Scarred, Isolde the Lame, and she was the undisputed Queen of the North, loved by a monster, feared by kings, and utterly, finally, free. The tale of the Scarred Queen and her Alpha King became a legend whispered across the continents. It dismantled the Southern Court's obsession with shallow perfection, proving that true power does not reside in a flawless reflection, but in the unyielding fire of a resilient spirit. Isolde transformed the Iron Jaw from an isolated, feared horde into a prosperous, diplomatic superpower, proving that even the most broken stones can be used to build an impenetrable fortress. Daria, once a weapon of pure destruction, learned that the fiercest protection stems not from rage, but from an undeniable, soul-deep devotion. Ultimately, their story is a testament to the fact that love is not about finding someone without flaws. It is about finding someone who looks at your scars and sees a map to a kingdom they would burn the world to protect.